Welcome, everyone. We're starting our roundtable talk. This roundtable talk is part of the Media Freedom Rapid Response, MFR. It's a project which is a Europe-wide mechanism established to monitor and respond to threats to media freedom in the region. And the European Center for Press and Media Freedom, ECPMF, is hosting this discussion today. My name is Alina Toropova. I'm managing the Journalists in Residence program. It's a temporary and relocation and protection program for journalists under threat at ECPMF. Our topic today is temporary relocation programs for journalists at risk. These programs are designed for journalists and human rights defenders who need to leave their current locations due to safety concerns for a period of time. And the reason can be threats, pressure, harassment, other types of intimidation that they're facing because of their professional activity. And usually organizations like ours offer a full support package like visa assistance, apartments, stipends, health insurance, and different tailored support activities during their stay. And today's roundtable talk, representatives of hosting organizations will speak about different aspects of their work in this field. Organizational questions this roundtable will last for 1 hour, so we'll end at 1 o'clock. And please feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A or F&A box below, and we'll read them out in the end of the session, and we hope to have time to answer to them. And now I will introduce our dear experts and my colleagues. I will start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth Duvik is Program Director of ICORN, a position she has held since 2007, and she has worked with ICORN since 1995. She's responsible for the operational and protective part of the ICORN residency program for persecuted writers and artists. She has particular expertise within visa and migration issues and led the Secretariat of Freedom of Expression in Stavanger Cultural Center from 1994. Elizabeth's background is the cross-section of international affairs, culture, and free speech. Exactly. Trish Bartley. Trish coordinates the protective fellowship schemes at Center for Applied Human Rights at the University of York. The fellowship schemes bring human rights defenders at risk to York for a period of 3 to 6 months. Trish also worked on research on the security of defenders at risk and research projects on best practices and well-being guidance for temporary location providers that all of us use. Trish is a long-term member of Amnesty UK's East and Horn regional team with particular expertise on the situation of human rights defenders in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and forms part of Amnesty UK's teacher advisory. And Maraya Kaje is an Iranian Dutch lawyer and peace advocate and has coordinated leadership and peace projects in North and East Africa. As she lived in Egypt and South Sudan, Maral worked closely with civil society and always tries to connect human rights with arts. Maral currently works at the Hague-based human rights organization Justice and Peace Netherlands as the program coordinator of the Global Temporary Relocation Initiative for Human Rights Defenders at Risk Shelter City. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, dear speakers, experts, colleagues, that you accepted our invitation. I will dive into the questions right away. And my first question would be, our programs have different duration times, from 3 months to 2 years. 3 months a Shelter City program and 2 years ICORN City, for example. My question is, could you tell me how does it impact the selection of the candidates and the process of the program itself in general? Elizabeth, maybe you want to start.
Yes, thank you, Alina, and thank you to ECPMF to arrange this roundtable. I'm very eager to hear also what my colleagues will say about these topics, because it's always interesting to share and to learn. When it comes to this with the time, how long, ICORN started out with offering 1-year residencies, but we noticed quite quickly that that wasn't time enough for those who came to our program to reorient, to find what they were going to do next, and to gather their strengths and their resilience to be able to continue with their work. We can say that for us, what we think of ourselves, if you look at like the landscape of protection, we don't offer necessarily rest and respite, and we don't offer also, or we do. I mean, there's also rest and respite baked into the program, but that's not our single or our main focus in that respect. Our main focus is that people will be able to continue to do their work. And the people who apply to us are people who are no longer able to work from home. So their main concern is to be able to come somewhere, find a safe place where they will be able to pick up their work or continue with what they are also doing, which means that a lot of the people who apply to us are already in another country, for instance, their country of origin. They might have difficulties with residency permits where they are. They might not have valid travel documents, but we are still able to find solutions for them. So it impacts who actually applies to us, and their circumstances, of course. It also then naturally impacts how we work with migration issues and who we need to have contact with and what sort of permits we are able to secure. As you probably know, most of you, if it in your profile looks like you might need more longer term protection, the embassies and the governments are very reluctant to offer you a shorter term visa. They say that there is a risk that you will not return. Now we have to work quite openly with this risk, both with our host cities. We work mainly with municipalities and cities around Europe, but also with other institutions. So it impacts also this work and how we work with migration officials and the governments. And thirdly, of course, it impacts also the content of our program, because if you go into it both as a host organization, but also that people are maybe not able to return, the next steps becomes a lot more uncertain and open-ended than if you have a shorter term residency where you know that it will end. So it becomes more of an issue to make it possible for those who are on the program to continue their work, to establish maybe new contacts where they are, and to establish a new way of working where they are. Of course, we will speak a bit about this later, how that impacts journalists, particularly because that's where I see the biggest difference maybe between the groups of people or the professions of the people that we work with. We work mainly with writers, artists, and the writers, of course, journalists. So journalists are the one largest group who applies for residencies with us.
Thanks. That's a bit, Mara, maybe you can tell a bit more about your programs usually last for 3 months. How did this decision come, and how does it impact the time period?
Thank you so much, Alina. And as Elizabeth said, really nice to be part of this, and echoing really that it's always nice to put the different programs next to each other and see what is the difference in approach and where is their complementarity in how we are operating. Specifically for Shelter City, this is a global program through which we are hosting up to 30 to 35 human rights defenders a year in the Netherlands. And its sister or initiative is the Journalist Safe Haven Initiative, for which we always reserve an additional 2 to 3 slots a year for journalists. And it's embedded in the overall program, but there is additional opportunities possible for journalists for their specific expertise. And we'll speak about that, I think, a bit later. But regarding the length, the original 3 months is used, and I think it's quite short term compared to what Elizabeth is describing. And it's based on the visa that is made available to us through the ministry here in the Netherlands that processes the visas for Shelter City guests. So that's a 3-month Schengen visa. And then with the possibility to extend for 3 additional months if in case the condition back home has changed so severely that someone cannot return. So actually from selection, you're really looking indeed on paper and in conversation with journalists whether their goal to leave their home country is to catch breath and return, because 3 months does just that. There is space to, within those 3 months, of course, connect and create additional opportunities. But if you're thinking of more lengthy writing pieces for journalists, etc., 3 to 6 months is in that sense quite limited. And so it is a very short setup, but it is for some journalists the way to sort of lay low while they're at risk back home. So I think that's that specific group that is constantly navigating their own risk and says, okay, right now I'm going to publish this article. I know that in the leading up to it and afterwards, I cannot just basically do my groceries. I cannot be outside. So I need to be somewhere else. And the country next door is not going to cut it. It needs to be somewhere just fully out of the familiar space. So I think that's just a few points regarding the length that can be shorter for journalists. And Trish, I think, will have also some thoughts on length of stay as they've experimented more with that.
Hi everyone. Greetings from a very, very cold north of England. Yes, so at the University of York, at the Centre for Applied Human Rights, our sort of standard programme is a 6-month fellowship. And I suppose, unlike some of my colleagues' programmes, the idea behind that really is for people to step back from their work. So not necessarily to continue it. We recommend that they kind of pause their work and then just take the time to invest in whether it's trainings, classes, well-being. They work on their own sort of individual research project with the idea that it'll be something useful for when they go back. So we find our 6 months programs are good for people that are, you know, I suppose it's a low to medium risk, but it tends to suit people very well that, you know, are feeling, you know, a bit burnt out rather than high risk, partly because it actually takes us quite a long time between when we ask for applications and people arriving. So, you know, certainly we're not very good at the responding to anyone that has a high risk need to be relocated. But what we found a few years ago was that for a lot of people, a lot of organizations, or even for family reasons, that 6 months is actually too long just for that break. So what we set up is what we call the Protective Writing Fellowship. So it's a 3-month program of relocation, and it's more hands-off. You know, there's less sort of input as far as classes and trainings, and it's really just giving the human rights defenders, journalists a period of time to again sort of stand back a little bit from their normal lives. And well, we call it a writing fellowship, but the writings could just be them writing their own reflections on where they're at, or creative, you know, it can be creative writing too. So that's been working fairly well. It's only, like I said, we've only run it twice, so I think it complements quite well. You know, we've got the more, you know, the bigger 6-month one, the smaller one, and we have just finished a pilot for 18 months, which was completely different, and I think it's much more, as Elizabeth said, similar to the ICORN program. So it was people specifically direct for people from areas of high conflict, prolonged conflict, people that really, you know, can't work from home. So they came to us for 18 months, and yes, they could continue their work in safety. In fact, we had a very prolific journalist on that pilot. And yes, so to all intents and purposes, it met its aims, but it's the what happens at the end, and that, well, you know, when you take people out of very conflictive areas, you can't send them back because that conflict's usually continuing. So we're just kind of assessing that at the moment, and I'll stop there. But yes, we have been experimenting.
Thank you, Trish. I will stay with you and have the next question regarding the topic that concerns all of us a lot. Many persons who join our programs cannot return back. Even if they planned this before they arrived to our programs, the threats stay or the situation changes to worse and so on. And there might be conflict starting in the areas where they lived before. How do you cope with these situations? What are your organizations doing?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, things can change quite quickly. So if we offer someone a place in April and they tell us there's no problem returning, by the time they arrive in September or leave the following March or April, the situation can be very different. So yeah, we've had several cases. I think what we would do, the first step is we just, you know, try and prolong our own fellowship for another couple of months. Clearly it's funding dependent, but that's by far the easiest option for us, you know. And it's, in the cases, for example, we had a case a few years ago. It was just the person from actually Zimbabwe didn't want to return because they were going to return just before the elections, and they knew it would be a really tense time. So that, you know, was quite clear that we could keep them for a bit longer, and then it would be safe. Once, you know, if we've done that and then there's still an issue, we often go to colleagues, like, you know, people here, people in our networks that run other relocation programs, to see if they can offer a place. That's probably the most difficult option because you know, places fill up quite quickly, and, you know, by the time we need them, there aren't spaces left. But yeah, we certainly ask other relocation schemes to see if they can host someone again for a bit longer. Another thing we look at is if the defender, the journalist, wants to return to their region, is looking at third safe countries where they can go with a visa, and we can support them maybe in another country for another 2 or 3 months. Yeah, I mean, as I think was it Morale saying, that, you know, that's becoming more complicated because there seem to be fewer safe third countries in the regions. And then, of course, the final option is, when we, you know, exhausted everything else, is staying in the UK and claiming asylum. And, you know, again, that's a process that we can support the people through. We have good links with the City of Sanctuary, with the refugee agencies. So it's, you know, it's really just exploring different options at the time and seeing what, you know, how best we can support the return or the stay.
If I can comment from our side, I mean, we work continuously with this, of course, because even if you have a 2-year residency, you might not be able to return afterwards. We find that many countries, of course, the situation hasn't changed by that time. So the first thing we do is, of course, is to map whether it's possible or not to return. And even just making that decision or becoming aware that that is not possible is something to digest for a long. People are really, of course, it's a shock because everyone has their work at home and would like to return whenever it could be safe. So even that is something that we need to talk through before that decision is made. And then, as Patricia said, we look for different options. What we try systematically is to work also with the governments in the countries where we have hosts in about 20 different countries, and to work to find more stable solutions, because we find that, of course, this what was mentioned with referrals to other organizations, it's always, of course, possibilities. There are other possibilities, but it could lead to more uncertainty, and going into a new residency will push the same question again, but just postpone it. So trying to find some sort of long-term solution, stability, and sometimes, as Patricia said, that is asking for asylum. It could well be that. I think there is a lot of the people we relocate that is not their first option, because it comes with a lot of both emotional but also practical limitations, but it is a very solid protection mechanism, and it also gives stability, and it's as I often say, it's not a life sentence. It's something that if the situation change, you can also change your status again. But I think trying to look through possibilities for longer term stability is key here, even though that might not seem as productive at the time. There might be other solutions that look more attractive, but are maybe just again more temporality. Is that what you say, Trish?
Yeah, and I guess to add from Shad City Netherlands perspective, we have now an alumni network of 211 human rights defenders, and from that, the numbers are quite surprising. How very few have chosen not to return. So it really echoes the resilience, the commitment, and the creativity of journalists, human rights defenders to find their own roots, to see where can they best do their work. And for many, it's not necessarily Europe. That's really coming out of how we are noticing in the numbers. Really, someone on paper could look like they would never want to return, and against all odds, you will see journalists making their way back to cover still the most important stories they need to cover. And I think that is a very important signal in a restrictive and closing political landscape, not just in the Netherlands, broadly in Europe, maybe even globally, to see that it is really very much in for human rights defenders and for journalists key to be able to continue their work in a way that fits them. And allowing them to have that mobility, I think, is very important to mention here. So really for them to have visas in their pocket that allows for them, when they are not safe, to move themselves without waiting endlessly for someone to process a visa for them, and possibly even a country neighboring, because not everyone has specific posts in the respective countries the human rights defenders and journalists are operating in. So really creating a web of multi-entry visas and effective visas for human rights defenders, journalists specifically. So I think that message has been heard at EU level. We are seeing the changes that are needed for that. We just really need the member states to sort of match up their national policies and start implementing it in a way that helps. And I think as organizations, as Shad City Global, as a partner organization, we connecting this messaging and in the mentioning them in all the right spaces is super crucial. And just the final thought regarding this broader long-term needs, we do see a need for more collaboration by creating regional hubs. The reason why we are now a 24 city network, which is nothing by far compared to ICORN, which is 80 plus city. But it is really our effort to align all the different efforts and to build strong regional hubs that allow for this sort of navigation by human rights defenders and journalists themselves. Where do I need to be right now, and what's closest to me, what's most helpful, what fits me, where do I have a social network? So I think it's key in how we are continuing to build and grow a safe web of safe spaces.
Thanks, everyone. I would like to add from the ECPMF perspective, of course, we will have to react on the developments. And some years ago, we realized that a part of our fellows really cannot return. Even if they want, they can't. And we cannot just leave them out there. We then created the Journalists in Exile program, which financially supports those who cannot return. And also other journalists who already came to Germany on their own. So that's one of the ways how we try to support, but of course we have to balance it out. It's still a temporary relocation program, and it has to speak to the audience who wants to relocate temporarily. And of course, the life is long and can change at any point, so we have to react on that too. That's why this program now exists. I will leave a link in our chat later. Thank you for this question. I want to come to the next one. Some persons who come to our programs are really under threat. They get murder threats, any death threats, sorry, and any kind of, they need to be anonymous. Some people use this time to take the stage and talk about their story, to talk about the background where they come from. So the needs are very different from people who come to our programs. How do you work around this? Mara, maybe you can start.
Yes, thank you. And I really love this question because it really zooms in, I think, to the core of the work, which is at the center of it all, for the broader group of human rights defenders or journalists, the way we, I think, all operate here is that they are the experts. They are the experts already navigating in their countries. They know best what is safe to them. They are, whether it comes naturally to them, security experts, because day to day they are operating in context beyond what we can think often of how at risk they can be. But sometimes it gets just too much and they need to get out. And I think that is really important to echo, that whether it is trainings they've already had or whether they're naturally just security sassy, that's something in them that allows them to operate. And there is a scale and there's differences. And I think as relocation programming, you're constantly in conversation then with them, trying to assess what is safe to you, what type of additional trainings is specifically needed to you. So a tailor-made approach, I think, is very central in all of our approaches. And also very much, I think, what is, for instance, through Shelter City, we then have an intake. So very much on paper, but also in person, having this conversation, mapping what are your needs, what specific trainings have you gone through, what specific trainings are there in addition, is a way to sort of get an understanding of from them what their security context entails, and also what is the most comfortable way for them when they are not there back home to operate. To be present or not to be present visibly in media spaces or all sorts of events. And through the intake, we come up with basically a visibility profile, and we are very flexible with that because I think it's important to also acknowledge that the visibility profile can change from one day to another. So nothing is set in stone, and you need to allow for that space to change from one minute to the other, the profile. That also means it's always better to be safe than sorrow, to not fully go public with someone. If indeed something completely backfires, you need to be able to sort of quickly do damage control and have in whether it's in your social media presence or any other space that they are part of, a proper management style to ensure their security. That being said, for quite a few journalists, visibility can also really add to their security. So it can be a security management tool. I think we've seen situation where someone is already such a well-known journalist that for them to lay low while they're away doesn't even make sense, right? So it's much more important for them to be more visible and tap into those networks to sort of boost their presence and say, this is the work that we do, and we receive that kind of support. In other situations, it's very thinkable if someone is accused exactly of that, right? Being a Western spy or all these sort of false accusations that many human rights defenders and journalists are dealing with. Being outside of their country and then reporting can create, and being visible can create additional problems to them or reinforce those accusations. So really, you need to fine tune with them what is the most comfortable way for them to manage their security while they're not back home, and what they can control. So if also after return things change, how do we agree with each other that what was put out can be managed properly? So it's really again, they are the experts, managing with them the overall needs and expectations, and being as flexible as needed for them to organize that. And when we look at, for instance, Shelter City Netherlands, we have 14 cities that are hosting with us in the Netherlands the guest. So you can imagine that's a lot of coordination work to make sure everyone is on the same page in organizing, etc. And there can be sometimes also different needs for cities that want to be more visible through their programming. So it is also sometimes a matching thought. How do we match the right profile of someone that cannot be visible at all with the right city? That there can be some political considerations, and we have to really take those serious, because that also goes to how we can continue with the work that we do. I'll stop there, but I think those are the key considerations in balancing between visibility and anonymity.
Anyone, feel free to continue.
Sure. Yeah, so ICORN also works with cities, as I said, and we have the same sort of issue. The cities who sign up to be an ICORN host or ICORN member, they have signed up to work for freedom of expression. And of course, that is whether they are hosting somebody who can be public or not. The program cannot rest on the shoulders of a persecuted artist or writer, of course. And and the people who we work with are also not just it's not enough that they come from a conflict area. They have to be individually targeted because of the work they have done. So they already come to our program with some individual threats and risks. So we have the first meeting we have with them and the first contact we have with them after they have arrived to their city of refuge. The safety, their publicity is the first thing we talk about. We never publish or do anything public, not in the city they come to or from us as an organization, until we have clarified that with them. And as Mara said, they are the expert of their own safety. But even though they're going to be on the long-term program, which means that we mainly work with their security where they are in their host city, they also have family members and others former colleagues and so on, who may be targeted for their work in exile, which means that they also might have to be careful. So it's very complex, but as Mara said, the journalists themselves are experts on their own safety, but we can help them also sort physical threats, digital, online threats. What's the risk in their city of refuge? What is the risk to their profile online and other, their reputation and so on. And we also manage differently their fear, which can be quite high based on their experience, and the physical threat, which might not be the same. Some people are very, very brave. They live with very high levels of real physical threat, but they're not very scared. And then you have others who have the opposite, who have lived so long with real physical threats that even when they come to a safe place, they feel very insecure. So we have to sort these things in different compartments in a way, and you have to deal with the threat and the fear in different ways, to put it short. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
I just think you've both covered absolutely everything that I could possibly say on the subject. So yeah, like my colleagues, we're just led by the people that come, and that's during the program and more after the program. If you look on our website, there's a list of current people that we're hosting and past. Some of them have got photos and names, some are just blanks, no names. So that it's really, constantly keeping on top of what the participants want. So that's our main lead.
And I was also thinking, Trish, we spoke quite extensively about risk that they encounter while they are here in the respective city they are hosted. So whether it's in the Netherlands or in the UK, and I find it very shocking and disturbing to see that those that have been relocated, even within Europe, still in some cases are scared, and they are facing some risk. And I think Elizabeth touched on it quite nicely by saying in some cases it could also just be generally coming, not being able to disconnect and feeling fearful. But in some cases, it's also not, right? So that transnational repression is real, and that we are seeing these worrying trends all over is something for us hosting within European cities, something I think we need to keep also mentioning with all the partners that we're working with, and to be very conscious of and take very seriously.
But I could also add that we have protocols, and we talk to both the host and the resident in our cities about practical things that they can do when it comes to, for instance, anonymity, but still being active. It can be working under another name, or being very careful when it comes to press. Their colleagues in the press are not always aware of how influential their work is, even in a local media outlet somewhere in the north of Sweden that can reach globally. So we have a lot of protocols on this from because most people would like to be active and come out and talk to others and share their stories, but we have to then make a framework around that makes it possible and safe, so that it's also about physical events, not just about appearances on online or others.
Thank you, everyone. I will also not tell anything new, so I just second what all of you said, and we also have some security protocols and persons who are assessing the risks ad hoc. So it's important to have a lot of support also around the organizations. We already touched upon the topic of journalists as a separate group. So I want to get back to that. We only host journalists, so you host all kinds of human rights defenders. From your experience, would you say journalists would be seen as a separate HRD group? Do they have special needs or approaches? Really keen to hear from you. Patricia.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, we generally, obviously our main program is for all human rights defenders, and that sometimes it can include journalists. So, but I'm trying to think what what makes journalists maybe distinct, because as you can imagine, a broad range of human rights defenders are incredibly varied, from all different walks of life. And I think the other thing, more noticeably, it's actually hard to define. You're better at this. What is a journalist? Because it seems to be a lot of people do a lot of writing, and I, not sure to what extent they're, activists on a subject that write and therefore become a journalist. So maybe somebody else could speak better to what is a journalist. I mean, what we found recently, I'm just thinking of two particular cases, is and I think, as Elizabeth or Maral said earlier, journalists are their name. They are, if they're especially freelance, they write as themselves. So they're clearly a target. It's not like in other organizations where you can, take turns at leading a movement or lying low. If you're a journalist, it's, what you do is there in your name. And certainly, I'm just thinking of the three that we've hosted in the last year. They have all been freelance, so they've not been working within a movement or an organization. So again, there's a lot on their shoulders. They don't have that same kind of community protection or support, and also with that comes the financial pressures, to support their families, to keep working. It's not that they're receiving a salary usually from another source. So there's a lot of those kind of social issues to be added. And yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, again, the people that we've hosted, in fact, the journalists have been at greater risk on return than the others. I haven't got enough numbers to generalize that, but it seems in these specific cases, they have been at a higher risk than others. And I know, for example, we're hosting somebody at the moment who works, she used to work a lot more on sort of conflict rights and things. But now she says, oh, well, now I just work on women's rights, or I move across. So, you know, maybe human rights defenders have got more fluidity between moving between the areas they work on, safer ones or less safe. And I suppose, again, those of you that work more closely with journalists can talk about journalists probably have a similar tactic moving around the stories. But yeah, I'm aware that certainly Elizabeth has a lot more experience of hosting journalists, so I'll pass over to her.
Thank you, Trish. I work mainly, of course, my work is mainly with immigration issues and getting people to safety. And with that, there isn't any difference, I would say, depending on your profession. What we see is it's equally difficult to get somebody who's a visual artist, but of course there is overlap as well. I think the greater difference, and then I remind you that we work with long-term people, residencies, people who might not be able to return, who might re-establish in their new country, so working with people in exile and being in exile, being forced to exile is never easy for anybody, just to say that. But for journalists, is unless you can continue to work towards your audiences and with your sources that you had where you came from, which of course might be very, very difficult to get access to get a job or to start working as a journalist in a new country is probably a lot more difficult, I would say, than to re-establish yourself as a visual artist, musician, or even a creative writer. Although that, as I said, it's never easy because you've always lost your to a high degree your audiences and your sources, what you draw your art or your creativity from. But I think that Alina can speak a lot more about to support the support they give to journalists in exile, and it's something that we would like to cooperate more on, because we see that it's not easy to reestablish yourself, and even if you are able to, which absolutely most want to continue to write about the things you wrote about that made it impossible for you to stay at home.
A few thoughts came to mind listening. I think the difference between journalists and human rights defenders, and this is the main reason I think why we developed Journalist Safe Haven Initiative, is that we noticed that there was an increased need of journalists at risk in the broader group. So first, I think it's important to mention that we do, apart from environmental rights defenders, we do see a rise of targeting of journalists globally, and it's really important to ensure that these spaces are kept really also for them. There's different type of initiatives that are active for them, and I think rightfully so. From selection, the difference that I've noticed quite much is the journalists just seem to write better. So their applications are incredibly well written, because that's their work, right? Describing, if you ask a journalist what's going wrong in your country, they'll be like, okay, let me break down in 800 words what is the exact problem. So it's a complete different application reading in also really understanding behind that. And I think human rights defenders at large have that too, really speaking about the risk that they are facing and not necessarily the risk going on in their country, right? So zooming in on themselves and saying, why are you necessarily in need of support? And then in what is the additional sort of needs, we do see a need for specific, because obviously the digital space is continuously changing, but if your work is very much also digital and your risks are therefore also digital, being updated on the sort of the most pressing digital security trainings is in a different way essential, right? And I think that alongside generally ethics and professionalism and all sorts of things, but training needs, we see journalists really wanting all sorts of training needs, because also in investigative journalism, there's just so much happening, right? And really connecting them to that broader group of trainings that is available is there. And then I think when it comes to I want to mention one more thing regarding the relocation of specifically journalists and in that bigger group. Yes, we have now individuals that never chose to be a journalist, but somehow indeed ended up as a journalist. Why? Because all of their friends were journalists, all of them got arrested. They were this one lawyer that was trying to get them all out. And at some point they took over the work because the work was just too important to not be taken up. So you see also the shift of indeed, like sort of, it wasn't necessarily an active choice. And you see also the opposite. You see women rights defenders that in their past, by profession, they're journalists, but they just left that aside and now are doing completely different work. So allowing for human rights defenders, journalists to be different sorts of thing at the same time, I think it's really important to not just box them in the specific one type of profession or type of activism that they've chose through, but allowing them to be different things at the same time gives also space and creativity for them to sort of navigate. What do I want to be, and what for my future is more secure for me to choose. So allowing them to be these different things at the same time and allowing us to be flexible to address different or offer different programming and different spaces for them is, I think, crucial to have that flexibility. Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. And you're completely right about the applications. They are incredible, very detailed, very deep. I wanted to add from my perspective, first of all, about the definition of journalism or journalist. For us, I guess each organization has its own who works in media. For us, it's very, very broad. We call it media worker, and this could be a camera person, it can be a blogger, it can be anyone who works in media and is working on freedom of information and wants to deliver information to public. And the one thing I thought about that is special about journalists as a group is that detachment from the area where they were located before and the sources they were located before can have an enormous impact on their work after relocation. We also observed situations when persons could not work anymore because they were regional journalists. They were dependent on the people on the spot and sources on the spot, and they lost them. So it has also this aspect, which is negative. Of course, they can get other sources here, but they might change the focus of their work because of that. So that's just one small add. We have another question that is, I would like to have short answers, if possible, so we have 2 questions in the F&A box that I want to address to you. What do our programs need to continue existing? We are going through hard times. I don't know when it was differently, but again, the whole world is okay. I'm not gonna start it here. What do we need to sustain our work and to continue supporting those who need it? Elizabeth, would you like to start?
Yeah, for us, we really need stable and defined, agreed pathways for people to travel, and to not just to travel, but to get the travel documents and to get also stability when they are in exile, in relocation. We are working to see if, I mean, our program is for 2 years, but if, and so many of the residency permits we are able to obtain are for 2 years, but we are working to see if it's a possibilities, and there are in some of the countries we work, to prolong or to get longer permits, which makes the stability, and there will be less uncertainty for people. Many of these are based on that you can help yourself financially, but then you again need the possibility to work and have an income. So that's, I think, is number one, at least for us. Of course, as you said there, Lina, what is happening in the world now, and as we've been mentioning before, the pressure on journalists is enormous. There is so many journalists who have been killed or abducted or are jailed this year. So it seems like the need is growing, but there isn't any more resources being given to this. And we see in our work with the especially when, of course, people we work with are often in long-term in need of long-term relocation. Some of them could go to other type of relocation programs that are not professionally based, for instance, resettlement of refugees and others. And these programs are also now being cut both in Europe, and we fear the worst, of course, with in the US, who has built up their ability to do this. So we are really looking for also alternative programs, because these are issues that cannot be solved by NGOs. We need to have more political will, I think, in addition to money. But we can't, even with more money, we won't be able to solve this crisis that we are seeing now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Elizabeth. I mean, the importance of having that ability to travel quickly, and certainly if anybody's trying to get a visa for the UK, they know that it takes months. So, you know, we need to get some, that would make a huge difference if there was some way people could safely come and go. I mean, yeah, it's clearly, you know, more funding, more long-term funding. We tend to live very much, you know, year to year. So again, but relocation for 6 months in North Europe is not cheap. So one of the things we've been looking at as a centre for the last couple of years is looking at, you know, how we can work with other universities or higher education institutions across the world, you know, where these places could do more to support activism, not necessarily their own national activists, but, you know, again, from within the region. And there is a certain level of protection that can be given if you're registered at the university. Clearly, you're there as a scholar or a researcher, so, you know, that gives some sort of protective cover. You know, if people just want somewhere to be, to rest, to carry on working. So yeah, we're looking at trying to work closer with different universities. We have got links now, the university in South Africa, but yeah, seeing where there are options, where there's sort of places that civic space is still, you know, still around or still a bit freer than it is in the countries that often these people are fleeing. So yeah, I'll keep it short. Pass over to Morale.
Yes, because I think we could spend an extra hour speaking about what's needed. Just to echo, we need more flexible spaces, more flexible funding, more flexible visas, just everything more flexible and more. And I think we live and breathe by network approaches. So having a sort of more effective coordinated effort of exactly what we're doing here today, Alina, really understanding what's everyone doing, how does it map and how does that come together? And also what should they be doing jointly to coordinate it more effectively. What I find very hopeful is in this network approach, as we see a shrinking sort of national frames all over Europe and also more broadly, we do see initiatives taken more at local level, municipalities wanting to really stand up for human rights, being a human rights city, and really take. I always remember last year at an annual summit of ICORN, it was the deputy mayor of Lyon, and she just stood there and she said, Lyon is a city where everyone is welcome. We stand for human rights. We are a human rights city. We're an ICORN city. We're a shelter city, and it really spoke to, I think, what we need in this sort of shrinking civic space at large for us as NGOs and organizations to work together and to operate together better. We need different allies also in unusual places. And I think that will bring light in the long term.
Thank you. Thank you all. I will add one sentence: appreciation of every human life, because even if we look at one person, it's the life of one person. And it's so hard to communicate this with our donors. Unfortunately, they need numbers and we need each person. So I am now reading out the two questions from the Q&A box. Both of them come from okay, no, they're different people. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the webinar. My question is how and where journalists from Afghanistan can apply for relocation. And the next one, hi, I'm an Afghan journalist based in Germany. Is there any way that journalists in exile can help your organizations regarding relocation of remaining journalists in conflict zones? Maybe a fundraising, verification method, anything that you can think of. First of all, big solidarity to journalists from Afghanistan. And we have been receiving, I'm not gonna lie, thousands and thousands of applications from Afghanistan. It was so frustrating that, for example, our organization doesn't have this geographical mandate. How would you respond to the questions that we received? Who wants to start? Please keep it short because we're short on time.
Yeah, I just want to say there's also a question to me directly in the other chat. For technical reason, I can't answer in the chat, but to that person, if they go to the ICORN website and see my email, they can send me an email. Yeah, when it comes to, I agree with we've also received thousands of requests from Afghan journalists, and as I said in my previous when we talked about the previous what we need, this is too big for small organizations like ours. We can relocate maybe 25, 30 people each year. It's a drop in the ocean, basically. So again, there isn't really one big mechanism to assist all those Afghan journalists left behind and who we all know are in terrible situations, both inside Afghanistan and those who are in exile in neighboring countries. And I think this speaks to what Maral was saying earlier. I think it was Maral saying that there isn't necessarily safe spaces in neighboring countries. So regional approaches are necessary, but they are not always efficient. So so that's to the first question, and then the other one I will I think I will put to Maral maybe, and because I think it's great if you can have I mean, fundraising is always fine. Find an organization to do some fundraising. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think for me, again, it's heartbreaking to see where we're at with Afghanistan now, and in leading to now, we've received many requests, and we've really tried to understand in this landscape who are the bigger actors taking on this much bigger load of requests for help. Indeed, if you have 35 places per year and it's for short-term relocation, on paper, any ministry based in these European countries will think Afghanistan is a long-term need. And even if it's sometimes not even the case, and we have had a situation where someone from Afghanistan eventually, whether they managed to get to the Netherlands and then they found their own way and they moved to overseas. So there's different ways that journalists, but also human rights defenders, also from Afghanistan, find their roots. It's much more a matter of the entry points and how do we connect. You can send also an info email to info@sheltercity.org. You can check the website. These will be shared by Alina as well. If it's not us, we are always specifically for Afghanistan mapping who is doing what and trying to forward and refer these cases to other protection partners that we know of. And I think that's also a really important differentiation between the emergency support and response needed versus this temporary relocation work that we do. It's all falls on this bigger cycle of protection. It's all connected, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we as operating in this landscape are as connected as we should be. So I think that is really for ourselves a major mandate to take on and to really find ways to align these efforts better. Regarding vetting, yeah, also that email address you can use. We've had the same conversation about Pakistan and trying to understand whether we can integrate for the independent selection committee some reference system. So anyone that applies generally can mention 2 references. So if you have someone that's applying, they could mention you as a reference or your organization. That could be a way to do it. But there is also other ways thinkable. For now, for instance, our selection committee took place yesterday, and we have integrated 2 new members, one from a specific region, and we will be having rotating chairs of specific regions that will then be also reading through the applications and be part of that. So just send an email and we can keep you updated on the developments that we are also integrating into our vetting and verifying processes. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mara. Trish, I'm very sorry. There is no time for you to answer, but please also leave your email for the person to contact you in case there is interest. Thank you for the questions, and we wish you all best luck to find the support systems that exist, and please contact us all too. My last question before everyone goes, 1 sentence from all of you. What's the favorite part of your job? Elizabeth.
Well, the favorite part of my job is getting in touch with and meeting fantastic people who work around the world to make their countries and their communities better. That is always amazing, and very brave people, and amazing work that's being done, and just happy to be able to do a little bit to that work and continue.
Thank you. Trish?
Yeah, probably similar. I mean, I just love it when it's, you know, we're doing something social or a retreat and playing cards and laughing and cooking, and you've got this amazing group of people just, you know, bonding and just having normal silly jokes. There's just something marvelous about those moments, I think, you know.
I love the unexpected stuff. So you think you're prepared for one thing, and on paper something looks like one thing, and you're taking a huge risk, and then there's this fantastic trans activist from Kurdistan that's flying back earlier than planned, and no one would expect that happens. And I think that's really a good reminder that regardless of how we think we know it, at the end of the day, we will keep getting surprised. And I think that keeps us going.
For me, it's matchmaking. It's when something that we offer fits to something that is needed, and the person is perfect for us and we are perfect for the person. This feeling is amazing, and I hope to have more of that. Thank you so much for your time, for your work, for the feeling of solidarity I always have when I work with you. And we'll see each other very soon. Thank you for everyone who's listening to us today.